So now that we're starting to understand adding script components to different kinds of objects and how they'll start to interact with each other, let's just experiment based on some things that we've seen already. I'm going to go into my marble, and I'm actually going to discontinue the use. I'm going to deactivate force 2. And I'll go back to force 1, and this time, rather than dragging it on the object, I'll just drag it right into the component window. And now I have force 1 applied to my marble object, the object I have selected. Remember, I modified my script just a little bit. I'll double click on it. And my modification was that I added this variable, called it the force, equals 20 semicolon, and instead of using a hard number in here for the y value, I'm now using the force variable. Okay, and that can be anything. That could be, you know, any value that we input. Now, what I want to do is, remember, the force 1 script also controls the AWSD keys. Now what's happening here is that we're mapping by referencing the character controller. The character controller in Unity basically just means that when we reference this quote horizontal and quote vertical, basically what we're doing is we're talking to the A and D keys for horizontal and the W and S keys for vertical. Or again, those are equivalent to the arrow keys on the keyboard. And basically what we're saying is we're taking a value of the input access get horizontal value. So whether we're saying, in the case of horizontal, we're basically checking to see if we're pressing the A key. And in the case of A, we get a value of -1. And if we press the D key, we're getting a value of 1. So if you think of this as -1 or +1, depending on the value that you're pressing, the value of the key that you're pressing, that's the value that we're getting out of the statement here. So basically we're either saying multiply by 25 the value of 1 or -1. And if you look, there's a comma here. So all of this stuff goes into the x-axis. Because remember, if we have 3 values in a row, it's x followed by y followed by z. So this first value is the x component. So we're mapping the A and D key, positive or negative, multiplied by 25 along the x-axis. We're not doing anything to the y value, and we're multiplying the vertically mapped keys to the z-axis. Okay, so we're saying -1 or +1 multiplied by 25. Now the cool thing about variables is I can take this value of 25 and say, okay, I don't want to use 25. I don't want to hardwire this information. I want to use whatever the value of the force is. So if I type in the force, now we're saying if I press the A key, it's -1 times the force, which is 20. So it's -20, applying a force of -20 along the x value. I'll do the same thing over here. I'll say the force, and this is for the z value. Okay, so I'm basically pushing this marble around its global coordinates according to the AWSD keys. Okay, I'll save this. I'm going to jump back into Unity. With my marble selected, I can see that I have the force 1 script. Currently this is going to work just as I suspect it will. And remember, our camera is mapped to a mouse orbit. So we have this mouse orbit now. And now my control system is working a little bit different, and it's a little confusing. Even though I'm following the mouse, I'm totally confused because we're doing this mouse orbit thing, and I just don't get a sense of, as I orbit my mouse around, it's changing the directions. It's really super confusing to me. Okay, if I don't change the mouse orbit, it's a little less confusing. I have some kind of control over it. But it's still kind of a confusing control setup. So let me go back to my camera, and I want to turn off mouse orbit, or I can even actually remove it entirely. What I want to do is I want to experiment with another camera control, which is a smooth follow. And if I do a smooth follow, we now have a smooth follow component, and it also has a target object just like the mouse orbit. And we need to tell it to target the object that we want to follow. In this case, we'll just, again, do the marble. And of course I have a distance, I have a height, and I have some dampening information here. So now when I hit play, now I lose the mouse control. Okay. But as I kind of chase this thing around, I'm getting some really, really crazy camera action. That's because I'm following this object and I'm sharing its rotation. And as I push this marble around, the marble is rotating. And so it's trying to rotate the camera and follow along, and it's just kind of falling apart. So I'm going to turn the mouse follow back off, and I'll turn the mouse orbit script back on. Now, if I go back to my marble, currently we're using force 1, and there's force 2. I'm going to turn force 1 and 2 off. I'm going to take a look at force 3. Now, force 3 is a much more complicated script, and it has more controls to it, but it's basically just the same as a combination of force 1 and force 2. It has the variable of the force, which we can change later. There's a couple of comments in here. All of this stuff matches the camera direction. And what we get is we get a positive force in the direction of the camera when we hit the fire button. Okay, that's a good thing. When we hit the A button or the D button, we get a force relative to the camera left and right. Okay, and then we have a key map to the jump button, which actually doesn't do anything just yet. But I'll provide some additional scripts or some modification to the script to activate the jump button. And the jump button refers to, just like the character controller refers to horizontal and vertical keys as W, S, and A and D, the jump button, when using this character controller, references the space bar. Okay, so I'm going to take the force script and I'm going to apply, force 3, and I'm going to apply that to my marble object. I'm going to go back to my camera. I'm going to make sure that the mouse orbit is turned on and that I'm targeting my marble object. And now when I hit the play button, I have a little bit more control over this object. So I can push it in the direction. I can push it in the direction. All right, I had a small little glitch which I fixed offline. If you're looking at, if you look inside the Force 3 script, I had a few components turned on for this gun object, which I had in a different version. I experimented with keeping turning on some power-ups with the script, and I actually have a script reference here that doesn't have a partner component here. So in short, I'm referencing something inside Unity that wasn't there. So I got rid of that, and now we should be good. So if you look inside the Force 3 script and you don't see a whole bunch of green stuff in here, you have a previous version of the code. So make sure that there's about halfway down there's this information included in here that should be green. We'll ignore that and we'll get back to that a little bit later. So, and also as a side note, the marble script that was provided to you in the downloads will not work out of the box because it has the same reference to an object. It's looking for an object called spawn point in here, which does not yet exist. So we'll come back around to that a little bit much later in the presentation. So, but experiment with Force 1, Force 2, and implement Force 3. Once we have Force 3 attached to our marble, we pretty much have our fully functional marble script. And you can modify this any way that you want, but if you remember, if I look in my Force 3, basically what we have is we have the force being mapped to the direction of the camera. We also have the A and D keys mapped to the left and right, and it applies a force perpendicular to the camera. And so the idea is that we can kind of drift left and right in addition to applying force with the mouse button. So let me hit the play button and just demonstrate how this works. If I fire the mouse button, I'm pushing in the direction of the camera. If I orbit back around, I can push back towards the center of the screen. And I can also use the A and D keys to drift left and right. Okay, so we have a lot more control over this marble now at this point. We can really gain a tremendous amount of control with it. So, and I could modify this script in a way that if I jump into the Force 3 script, if I didn't want to use the fire button to apply a positive direction, what I could do is I could comment this code out. So here's when I experiment, here's the workflow that I'll end up using. I'll copy this if statement, and I have the if get fire button fire 1, I'll hit return, I'll paste it, so I have an exact duplicate. Now this code is going to error until I comment out that top portion, and I'll just add 2 slashes in front of it. So now I have a duplicate that's commented out. And now if I look here, there's if get key equals, and this is a little bit different. This does not refer to the character controller. This is actually referring to keyboard input. And what this is saying is that if the A key is pressed, do all this stuff. Well, I want to borrow that bit of code, and I'll use that to replace it. This part. Okay, so now I have if A is pressed, move in the positive direction. The A key is not the one that I want to use. I actually want to use the W key. So I'll replace A with W. So what I have now is, instead of writing all this code out, I've borrowed this bit of information. If I've introduced an error, I still have the original bit of code here. And so now when I press the W key, I'm applying the positive value, or the positive force according to the camera. So I've just saved that. I'll jump back into Unity. I'll hit the play button. And so now if I didn't inadvertently introduce any errors, now when I press the W key, it's working just like I expected. So instead of pressing the mouse button, I can still mouse orbit, but I'm holding down the W key. And now I have A and D as controls as well. And if I want to add a reverse to this, I would map a function to the S key. So let me do that. I'm just going to do this really quickly. Currently, if I press the W key, I'm getting, you know, all this code to execute. I'm just going to copy that little chunk of code. I'll add a few line breaks, and I'll paste it. And I'll change the W. Again, I have a duplicate here. I'm going to change the W to S. And so now I want to do the opposite of I don't want to apply a positive force to the forward camera direction. What I want to do is I'll say multiply this by not the force, but negative the force. Okay? Or I could create a variable up here, say var, and I'll call this reverse equals, let's say 15. Maybe I want a different variable value here. And so when I hit the S key, instead of multiplying it by negative the force, I could say by reverse. So multiply that by reverse, the variable called reverse. So it's a little less, I don't have the power or the force that I would to go backwards that I would to go forward. So I have 2 different variables here. I'll save that. I'll jump back into Unity. I'll hit the play button, and I'll test my script. So far I'm not getting any errors. That's a good sign. So when I press the W key, I go forward. When I press the S key, I'm still taking off in the positive direction. So I got a little bit of a glitch, but I'll experiment with that and figure out what's going on. Oh, I forgot to add a negative to the value. I don't want this to be a positive number. I want that to be a negative. So it's multiplying a variable, but a positive variable is the forward direction. A negative variable, or a negative value, would be the reverse direction. So that was my glitch. I forgot to add a minus 15 in front of that. I'll hit the play button. So now I can go forward with a force of 20, and I can go backwards. I'm still heading in the positive direction, so maybe I didn't save my script. I'll continue to tinker with this and get that to work. Okay, so I had a little glitch in my script, and what I ended up doing is I actually just changed, instead of using this negative variable, I changed the reverse key to negative the force. I'm not sure why my negative 15 wasn't working, but I'll continue to tinker with that. I just experimented with a few things, but by adding negative the force, I got my script to finally drive backwards. I'm just not sure why reverse equals negative 15 is not working, but wouldn't be the first time I introduced a little bug into a script, and I'll take a closer look at that offline, and if I come up with a solution for it, I'll definitely post a comment about that. So currently my script works where if I press the W key, it moves forward. If I hold the S key, it moves backwards, and I have left and right. And remember, the forward direction is not forward according to the global coordinate system. It's based on the direction that my camera is looking. So that can be a pretty valuable thing. So experiment with that. Have fun with it. We'll push this a little bit further and start talking about other things in the environment that could trigger events, things like teleport. Maybe we'll introduce some bad guys that might try to chase us around if we get too close to them. So experiment with the marble controls or the sphere controls, and then we'll start thinking about how we can make this game a little bit more playable. So we'll catch up in later presentation.